So in this video, we're going to keep talking about the onStep function. In particular, I want to talk about the steps per second, and I also want to show that little side note I did in the last video, mentioning the onSteps function, just so you can kind of see how that works and why that might be useful when you're programming. So over here, simple little program, we have a counter variable that is storing a label starting with a value of 0, and then on step, we're going to add 1 to that value, and when we run it, you'll see that it just counts up forever rather fast, right? Now, what we can do is we can call, and we've seen the app dot a couple times. We're not going to get to the details of how exactly that works, but we can call app dot steps per second. And I said call, it's not actually a function, it's a property of the app object, I'm assuming is what it is. And we can set it equal to whatever we want. And this line over here is going to tell us how many times per second the onStep function is called. So if I do this, what I'm saying is I'm making my variable counter and I'm setting it equal to a label with a value of 0. Then I'm saying I'm going to set my app so that it calls the onStep function once every second. Normally it's called multiple times per second, but we're just going to call it once per second. And then every time we step, we're going to add the counter value, add 1 to the counter value. And here I'll get my timer up on the phone over here, and I'll try to run these at the same exact time. So I'm going to try to press play on this as well as hit the run key at the same time. So you can see that it's looking like it's doing it pretty similar, right? We've got 5 seconds, 6 seconds, 7 seconds, and every second I step, so I add the counter by 1. That's what my phone app is doing, more or less. We can also change it to be, 60 frames per second. Everybody wants 60 FPS, right? It's better than 24 or even 30. And so now this is going to count fast. This looks like it's even faster than the default, right? This is going a little bit faster than the default frame rate. And this will change not just how fast you count, it changes how fast the onStep function gets called. So instead of changing the value, maybe I do center x plus equals 1. At 60 frames per second, we're moving like this, right? That's actually not that fast. Only 1 pixel every 60 times per second, 60 pixels every second, not going that fast. If I change this instead to maybe I'm only stepping 10 times every second, well, we're going to move way slower, right? And they do recommend in one of their exercises here for the 6.3s that if you go way too fast, like let's say I have 60 frames per second going like this, but then I'm moving I don't know, maybe 50 pixels every time the step function is called, right? I'm moving 50 in the x direction. It might start to get a little bit too fast. Or like 100, I'll barely even see it, and I don't know how it showed up on the video, but I only see it like once or twice on my screen. So if you're worried about the speed, they do recommend trying to mix and match your actual physical movements in the canvas along with your steps per second. Normally, I would recommend coming up with steps per second that make sense for your program, and then you can adjust how fast things go, because this steps per second is going to affect everything. And maybe that's worth talking about a little bit too here. So maybe I'll make a little rectangle, or I'll say box equals a rectangle at 200, 100 with a height and width of 20 and 20. And I can have, 60 frames per second. I'll have the counter move 5 every time, and I'll have the box dot center x move by 10 every time. And so, of course, the box is going to be moving faster. If I slow down the app's steps per second to 30, the box is still going to be moving faster than the text, but they're all going to be moving a little bit slower, right? If I bring this down to 10, everyone's moving slower, and it starts to get a little bit choppy, right? And maybe I deal with the choppiness by saying, well, let's make it smoother by making these guys move a little slower. and it's still kind of choppy. The box is still choppy. That's going there. Anyways, playing around with those numbers, just recognize that when you change the app.steps/second, that's how often the onStep function gets called. So it's going to affect the speed of everybody. Where if you have a couple different things in your scene moving around, you need to change how fast they're moving by. The next thing that I want to point out is, let's go back to this being a counter that's actually going to increase its value every time, is you can test your program to make sure, because sometimes when you're doing this, now we're running, 60 steps per second? You're not going to be able to hover your mouse around, hold the control key, pause at the exact right moment. So you're going to want to potentially be able to use this onSteps function, and this will now say, all right, I know we set the rate to be 60 frames per second, or 60 steps per second, and I know I'm counting the value up once every step. I'm moving the box a little bit to the right once every step. You can call the onSteps function to say, hey, I want to see what happens after, if it's 60 frames, right? 60 times I'm calling the step per second after 60 steps. So that'll be 1 second, right? And you can figure out how many steps you want to take, or maybe how many seconds you want to take. There's just a little bit of math to do that. And once you have that calling your onStep function, the amount of times that you want it to be called, you can then just say app.stop, and it'll stop running the program. So instead of just calling it indefinitely going on forever, you can now control using onSteps how many times you want to try calling the step function to test whatever you might want to test out, right? Maybe you're getting an error where something is supposed to be off the screen after 2 or 3 seconds, but it's not there. Well, you can, figure out how many seconds it should be, do some math, and then call it on that many seconds or that many frames and see what happens. So let's just see an example of that. Over here, it looks like after, so we don't see the animation, by the way, it just does that immediately. Like, what would it look like after 60 steps? I didn't see the box moving off to the right, and this just popped immediately to 60, right? If I try, and then, if I got rid of this stop, it would be kind of weird. It would start at 60 and then go up from there. So you just got to be careful. Usually if using this, it's going to be just for testing, and then you want to often stop your program at the end to be like, all right, what happened after 60 calls? Maybe if I just call 10 times, now this will be 1/6 of a second, I guess, because it's 60 frames in 1 second. I'm doing 10, which is, 1/6 of 60. Anyways, let's see here, goes to 10, and the box will be at this location. If I test it at 20, then the box will have been over there, and then our counter's up to 20. So just, showing you the steps per second, how that works. The onSteps function, really, really helpful for potentially testing your stuff out. Definitely they use this in the exercises to test out your code. So hopefully that helps you understand how you can adjust the frame rate, how speed works relative to frame rate, right? You can make things faster by making them move further, or by changing the frame rate, or a combination of both. And hopefully that helps you understand when they're doing test cases, or how you can create your own test cases for testing your own programs out.